How's it going, you guys? So in this video I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and some of my thoughts on how to prevent the severe symptoms of COVID. So I have not made a video on this subject since the beginning of this pandemic back in like March of last year. The reason for that is because I have been very skeptical about this cancel culture thing because it seems like social media platforms are able to shuttle traffic now away from certain people who are pushing agendas that they don't believe in, and they push more traffic. Organizations like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, they seem to shuttle more traffic towards this idea that you need to that pharmaceutical medication is your only option, and if COVID-19, you're going to die if you get it, blah blah blah, this and that. So I was really just scared of like getting my YouTube video deleted, getting a strike, getting unmonetized. So that's why I haven't really made any videos about it. The other reason is because it's a very sensitive subject. And it's one of those things, kind of like politics and even like nutrition and religion and all these things, where people just go crazy about their beliefs. There's no critical thought, no rational thought, and no respect for the possibility that maybe you don't know everything about what you're saying, and maybe you're wrong, maybe, so people get triggered when they hear opposing beliefs on this. And I don't know, it was just a whole lot of negativity. But at this point in time, so on Instagram, I have been posting studies, lots of cohort studies, basically studies on patients that are hospitalized with COVID, and the correlations between what type of pre-existing conditions they are having and their vitamin D status and things like that, and correlating it back to the severity of their symptoms and things like that. So I've been posting these studies and reviewing them on my Instagram. If you're not following me already, you need to. It's at Coach Wolfgang VL. Go ahead and follow me on Instagram right now. Go and follow me. And so I've been following the literature like pretty damn closely ever since the beginning of the pandemic. So I'm going to kind of like talk about some of the things that I've reviewed in the past, and what the science says is involved in making you more susceptible towards the diseases. So basically, earlier today I saw an article on CNBC. It's entitled "CDC Study Finds About 78% of People Hospitalized for COVID Were Overweight or Obese." Okay, this is according to the CDC, and it's an article on CNBC. Now, I have found studies that said at certain hospitals 86% of the people were obese and had high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes. I've seen studies that said 92% of patients hospitalized had pre-existing conditions and were obese. So this, I haven't really looked at the study, but I'm thinking as a summary, is kind of like a meta-analysis of all the cohort studies. Which is why it's a little bit lower, but still 78%. Now I'm gonna actually dive into this the actual study later on. I couldn't find the link in this article, haven't had time to today, but I don't really feel like it's necessary because there's been so much evidence that has said the same thing over and over again this whole time. That 78% of people hospitalized with COVID were overweight or obese. So here's the thing. I've had multiple clients, working as a personal trainer specifically, who at various times last year were tested positive for COVID-19, and then they had to quarantine for like 2 weeks, and they were asymptomatic. Now, there was one who actually had pneumonia, but did not get sent. They were in the hospital for like 3 days, and they were sent home even though they had severe pneumonia. But they all survived. Only one of them had symptoms. The majority of them were pretty much everyone was asymptomatic except for one who was hospitalized for 3 days with pneumonia. He said the pneumonia lasted 1 entire week, and then they were good to go. And no long-lasting effects or effects that had it happen later. So, working as a personal trainer, I'm dealing with populations of people who are overweight or do have, diabetes and things like that. In fact, 3 of these clients were actually significantly overweight. I had one that was 350 pounds. I had one that was 285 pounds. They're not just your typical, oh, I have a couple pounds to lose. These people were clinically obese. One was morbidly obese. So they were all asymptomatic, and they were already losing weight already. All of my clients had already lost like 20 to 40 pounds each, depending on the person. So they're already taking steps towards their health. They're following my protocols for overall health and fat loss. Generally, as a quick primer, I have all of my clients buy A New Atkins for a New You by Stephen Finney, Jeff Fullock, and Eric Westman, because it is the primer on low-carb nutrition written by the pioneering researchers in the field. And that protocol is used clinically to put metabolic syndrome in remission. Everything from type 2 diabetes to morbid obesity to binge eating disorder, high blood pressure is put in remission on that protocol. So they're on a low-carb diet. Most of them are keto. And I have them supplementing with vitamin D on a regular basis. Generally, I recommend fish oil, and I always coach them on the type of fats that they're supposed to be eating. Generally, higher saturated fat and as little to no linoleic acid as possible. So their DHA and EPA to linoleic acid ratio is in the favor of omega-3 DHA and EPA, because they're hardly eating any omega-6 linoleic acid. A couple of them still eat chicken and pork, but the majority of their diet is steaks, most of them. One of them actually mostly consumes fish, but most of them are on a fish oil supplement. Actually, only a couple of them are on a fish oil supplement, but all of them have been taking vitamin D, and they've been on a low-carb diet. They're overweight, and yet they're asymptomatic. So here's the thing. It's not about the body fat that you're carrying. It's about your vitamin D status. It's about your DHA and EPA to linoleic acid ratio. It's about the amount and types of carbohydrates that you're eating. And it's about how much hormetic stress you put your body under on a regular basis, as well as your insulin sensitivity and a couple other things. As I drink my delicious reishi mushroom tea with some raw local honey. So here's the thing. So the totality of evidence suggests that well over 70%. So all studies say some studies say over 70%, some say over 80%, some even say in the ballpark of 90% or more of patients hospitalized with COVID have pre-existing conditions, mostly metabolic syndrome, whether it's obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure. What is the cause of high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes? Insulin resistance, okay? So of course you can do caloric restriction or something like that, but to get your insulin under control, but that's more modifying it by starving yourself. If you just cut the carbs down and eat only low glycemic, low carbohydrates like berries and fibrous vegetables, nuts and seeds, you will get that hemoglobin A1C down. You'll get your fasted insulin down. You will reverse metabolic syndrome over time. That, in my opinion, is the number one factor involved in COVID-19 severity. Okay. There was a trial that was released, I think it was in October of last year. I forgot where it was from, but it was a intervention trial out of a hospital, and I believe it was over 100 patients, or was it 200 patients? They were hospitalized with COVID, and they were on their way to the ICU, the intensive care unit. So these were severe cases, and they were treated intravenously, meaning they injected them with vitamin C. And it was it was vitamin D. They injected them with the equivalent of 45,000 IUs of vitamin D per day for 7 days. And they went from being a severe case in the ICU to being released from the hospital with no clinical symptoms anymore. That was after 7 days of being injected intravenously with vitamin D. After that, they were on a maintenance dose of 7,000 IUs per day for like, I think it was the next 30 days. And there was no remission or anything like, or there was no like their symptoms didn't come back, basically. And I had originally seen that study on Chris Masterjohn's website. If you don't follow him already, go subscribe to his YouTube channel and check out his website, Chris Masterjohn, PhD. Lots of amazing information. In fact, he has a debate with Paul Saladino on antioxidants and vitamin C, which is very good stuff. Has a whole course on antioxidant status and how antioxidants work in the body. Just amazing stuff. Anyway, so there is an intervention trial that exists now that shows remission in COVID-19 in a severe cases of patients in the ICU within 7 days. Okay, and we haven't heard about this in the mainstream news, in the mainstream media. You know, people are thinking that they're safe, you know, walking around eating junk food, wearing 2 pairs of underwear on their face, and then sanitizing their probiotic bacteria on their skin to smithereens every hour. You know, it's a false sense of security. Now, I think it would be rational to do both, right? If you're going to sanitize your skin to dust, and if you're going to wear masks on your face, especially if you think double masking it's going to work. I think it's funny, 1 mask didn't work in certain areas, so now the health authorities are saying 2 masks is better. It's funny. But it's fine if you want to wear a mask and sanitize. But you should also be paying attention to the more effective interventions that are shown in studies to play a direct role in the severity of COVID-19 outcomes. 78%, if that's the totality of all the evidence, of all hospitals combined, that is a lot of people. 78% are obese that are being hospitalized. That's a lot of people. In my opinion, that's enough to prove causation for what actually influences your immunity. Like, people will see that and they'll have all sorts of weird interpretations, but can you imagine if 78% of all meat eaters in the world, okay, developed heart disease and cancer or something within 10 years or something? I mean, within a matter of a year, really. That's how long the pandemic's lasted so far. If 78% of all vegans drop dead of a heart attack within a year, then that's enough to prove causation, don't you think? But for some reason, 78% of people hospitalized with COVID are obese. That's not enough to prove causation. And causation meaning the mechanisms behind it. So here's my interpretation of this, is it's not necessarily the obesity that's causing the susceptibility to severe symptoms of COVID. However, body fat, carrying excessive body fat does increase the amount of systemic inflammatory markers in your blood. So body fat is inherently inflammatory. However, what other things do obese people typically partake in? Typically, they have lower vitamin D status. Typically, they have insulin resistance or a high fasting insulin. They're almost always consuming a lot of junk food. It's very hard to become 100 pounds overweight if you're eating nothing but whole foods. So what does that mean? That means they're eating a lot of high glycemic load carbohydrates, obviously. They're not eating the occasional berries and mostly meat diet that my clients are following. You know, what chances do you think that they're getting out in the sun and getting enough vitamin D to put their vitamin D status in healthy levels to support their immune system? It's unlikely. Are they taking vitamin D supplements on the side? Not unless their doctor has already prescribed them. At that case, that probably means they're already deficient. And usually obese people don't care. I mean, typically it's common. And there's studies that show that people who are sick generally do not follow their doctor's orders on prescriptions and things. And I've seen it. I've had clients who tell me, even though they care about their health, they have trouble staying consistent with their supplements prescribed by their doctors or their medications. So all of that points towards maybe obesity obviously contributes to the immunity deficits, but we have evidence now showing vitamin D can put COVID symptoms into remission. So vitamin D status plays a role. There is actually a study correlating omega-3 status to COVID severity symptoms. It's a pilot study, and I pointed out some serious flaws in their methods, in particular the differences in sample size in the control group compared to the omega-3 group. But the point is that there is evidence that shows omega-3 plays a role. Typically, obese people have a high omega-6 linoleic acid content compared to omega-3, and they have way more body fat to go around, so the total net amount of fat that they have on their body in general is high. They probably have high triglycerides, which is a signal of poor metabolic health. Anyway, it's most likely the fatty acid content of their diet, the quality and quantity of the carbohydrates that they're eating, and their vitamin D status. So we know without a shot, so there's many studies that actually, there's experimental studies, and there are some intervention trials showing when you consume more refined sugar, it can increase your inflammatory markers and decrease antioxidant status. There's experimental data in a petri dish, which, you know, for what it's worth, it actually shows impairment in certain things like vitamin C status, glutathione status, which means impaired immunity. Vitamin D status is a direct reflection of your body's capacity for immunity. And obviously your hormonal balance and things like that as well. There's some people that believe vitamin D itself is not causative of health, but vitamin D is actually a marker that goes up during periods of time when you're healthy, and vitamin D goes down when you're under a lot of sickness and illness. And they claim that supplementing vitamin D is not the solution, but getting rid of the underlying problem in the first place. But the fact is that there's a direct correlation between vitamin D status and how healthy you are, how much oxidative stress you're under specifically. And then hormetic stressors is a big thing. How many obese people do you know that sit in the sauna for 30 to 45 minutes at a time, other than ones who get a gym membership and think it's going to burn fat? It's really not common. Most of those people that are in the hospital for COVID are probably sedentary individuals. You know, I mean, seriously, 78% of these people are obese. Chances are they're not living healthy lifestyles. They're not being put under hormetic stress. They're not exercising on a regular basis. And hormetic stressors, we know, help to upregulate glutathione. It's one of the main mechanisms that is speculated to be the reason why fruits and vegetables are associated with better health outcomes at higher intakes. I personally question that science, but healthy user bias might be the better explanation. But I think hormetic stressors play a role. I think it's a lack of hormetic stress. I think it is a lack of vitamin D, probably from a lack of sunlight, which is also a hormetic stress. It's a lack of exercise. It is excessive body fat. It's omega-3 to linoleic acid status. It's vitamin D status. That's what I think. And to put the nail in the coffin here, so this is the reason why I mentioned these specific factors, and I repeat them over and over again, is because there's so many people that point out, oh, you know, my uncle, got diagnosed with COVID, and he's in the ICU, And he ate healthy, and he was like a marathon, or he used to jog 5K a day or something. He runs like 5Ks every now and then. He's a marathon runner, which, by the way, a 5K is not a fucking marathon runner. Just so you guys know. But yeah, he's healthy. He runs 5Ks every now and then. He competes in running. But the thing that people need to understand is, just because you might be lean, maybe you're athletic, right? You could even be eating more fruits and vegetables, but you could still not be addressing these specific factors and have a really bad outcome from COVID. Conversely, you can be overweight like some of my clients and be asymptomatic, because it's not necessarily how lean you are. Just because there's a correlation doesn't prove causation, although, again, excessive body fat does increase inflammatory markers. If you're lean and you're athletic, right, of course you lower your risk of severe COVID symptoms. But so if 78% are obese, what about the, what is it, the 22% or whatever, if I did my math correctly? Or is it, yeah. So the thing is, the lean people that suffer from COVID typically are probably eating a higher amount of vegetable oils, or at least they're consuming more linoleic acid compared to omega-3, and obviously your body's not going to be able to convert arachidonic acid and alpha-linolenic acid at a good enough rate to DHA and EPA in order to offset that linoleic acid. If every time you go to a steak restaurant, your steak is drenched in this plant-based butter, which is just omega-6 up the wazoo, you're doing if it fits your macros, and you go to like IHOP, which is real common in those circles, and you eat pancakes that's drizzled in the artificial maple syrup and the margarine, the not real butter, but like the margarine, you're getting a huge insulin spike from that stack of pancakes with the artificial syrup and the linoleic acid. And studies show it takes up to 2 years to fully remove that linoleic acid from your body. And omega-3 fish oil supplementation seems to help to speed up that process, as well as obviously losing body fat at the same time. What I'm getting at here is these lean individuals, probably their insulin is all over the place, even though they're lean. Yes, being lean and restricting your calories can definitely it can lower your hemoglobin A1C. Fasting insulin, I don't know. You can even put type 2 diabetes into remission, but you can still have hardcore insulin spikes throughout the day, which can impair your immunity. The refined carbohydrates in general might actually rob your body of vital nutrients like B1 and vitamin C. Just because you're lean and maybe your blood markers are okay does not mean that you're safe from COVID because you're lean. Just because you're lean does not mean you're protected. These people who are lean, your Uncle Jack, who runs a 5K on a regular basis, blah blah blah. He probably has more omega-6 to omega-3. His vitamin D levels, he probably needs to get tested, and you should probably still supplement vitamin D as a pharmaceutical intervention, almost like a supplemental. I'm not even going to say it, but a preventive measure essentially. And his carbohydrate intake is probably not ideal. Now again, these are the factors that have been shown by science to be involved. Mostly the metabolic health thing. And the vitamin D seems pretty convincing. But again, like maybe someone who's on like a low carb, ketogenic or low glycemic load diet, and their vitamin D status is stellar, and they take 10,000 IUs of vitamin D a day, and for whatever reason they still get COVID or something and they die from it. That's very possible. But for me personally, based on not only the science but my own experience with people, being around people that are sick with the flu and then me not really even noticing anything from it, and then dealing hands-on with clients who have had COVID and seeing which ones actually notice symptoms and which ones don't, which all of my clients except for one were asymptomatic, even being overweight, and studying the scientific literature closely, I would be most confident following these guidelines that I mentioned and living my life to the fullest, not really being scared of COVID. That is the way that I see it. Now, there's other things to talk about, like infecting other people who don't really care about their health or whatever, and they don't want to eat like a keto or a low carb diet to try to save themselves or whatever it is. They don't want to supplement vitamin D. They don't want to exercise, whatever. It's probably unethical, obviously, to put them at risk or whatever. But look, this video is not about that. This video is about what's probably driving COVID severity, what does the science say, and what can we do about it. And so this is my stance. This is, and I'm not even getting into things like zinc and shit like that. If you're eating a adequate protein, low carb diet, you're getting enough fucking zinc in your diet. And believe me when I say, supplementing with extra zinc is probably not a good idea, because it's not the zinc that matters. It's zinc to copper and a ratio and its relation to your immunity. So I think a lot of people might experience benefited immunity from supplementing zinc because they've been deficient in red meat most of their life, or they've been deficient in protein foods in general, but especially from animal sources that does not contain these mineral chelating nutrients or anti-nutrients, right? If you're already eating like 2 pounds of red meat like I do, and most of my clients do every day, do you really think you need a zinc supplement? It's very possible that the increased red meat intake with more zinc could possibly have benefited them the way zinc might, for immunity. But the most significant things are mostly metabolic health, which is based on your glycemic load of your diet, the type of carbs and the amount that you're eating, getting adequate protein, and then, the omega-3 status, and then vitamin D, since it's been shown in an actual clinical trial, as well as, there's plenty of population studies and lots and lots of Petri dish studies. And in fact, it's interesting because before the clinical trial was released, Rhonda Patrick did a whole podcast with Joe Rogan talking about the evidence surrounding vitamin D and respiratory viruses, including SARS-1. And now we have an intervention trial. So, there's people that will be like, oh, you shouldn't need a supplement. You don't have supplements in the jungle. I don't really care about what's in the jungle. I care about what does the science say, how convincing is it, and then does it stack up to reality. So these are the most significant things that I have found involved in COVID. Now, as far as all the other things surrounding this pandemic, the conspiracies and things, I don't know if, I want to talk about that, but that's a very sensitive subject, and either you're really deep in the conspiracies to the point where you're full of shit to an extent, or else you're so far against the conspiracies and so far bought into mainstream media that you're full of shit to a certain extent. There's not a lot of people who are like, yeah, there definitely seems to be something else going on here, but I don't know what it is. But COVID is also clearly affecting people's lives in a negative way. People are either like, oh, it's a hoax, or else like, oh no, it's the deadliest thing ever. So, obviously, I think any rational, balanced person who watches my content probably knows that I'm not too extreme on either sides. I'm pretty damn skeptical all around. So, with that being said, eat your meat, restrict your carbs, get vigorous exercise, and live a healthy life. And, yeah. But I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. This is all just educational in my opinions. You are responsible for your own health and what you do. Thank you very much for tuning into my video, and I will talk to you all next time. Let me know down in the comments, what do you guys think about all this? What was your experience? Have you gotten COVID? Do you know people who've gotten COVID? What was their nutrition like? What do you think? Do you think it's a conspiracy? What kind of supplements do you think are involved? Tell me what you think down below.